Officer Dale Griggs had made thousands of judgment calls in his 20 years of courthouse security, but the one he made at 9:14 a.m. on September 3rd would end his career. We saw the black woman in the navy suit walking toward the front of Courtroom 4B. His hand moved instinctively to his handcuffs. She was too composed, too confident, too sure of herself in a space where he controlled who belonged. Back of the room, he barked, already knowing she'd resist, already planning his next move. The cameras were recording, the crowd was watching, and Prosecutor Whitaker was smirking as the metal cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. What happened next would become the most watched courthouse video in American history, because the woman Griggs had just humiliated wasn't a spectator or a defendant's relative. She was the Honorable Judge Naomi Carter, and this was supposed to be her first day on the federal bench. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice in the heart of downtown, its limestone columns weathered by decades of rain and sun. On this humid Tuesday morning, the building hummed with more energy than usual. People streamed through the metal detectors, their conversations creating a low buzz that echoed off the marble floors. The controversial embezzlement trial of Marcus Thompson, a prominent city councilman accused of siphoning funds from youth programs, had drawn reporters, activists, and curious citizens from across the state. Courtroom 4B was already packed by 9:15. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. News cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. Police officers stood at every entrance, their hands resting casually on their utility belts, scanning the crowd with practiced suspicion. Through the main doors walked a woman who seemed to move in her own sphere of calm. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet elegance rather than flashy expense. Her heels clicked against the floor with measured precision. She was black, perhaps in her early 40s, with natural hair pulled back in a sophisticated twist. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly where you belong. Heads turned as she passed. Some people assumed she was a defendant's relative, maybe an aunt or sister dressed up for court. Others thought she might be a social worker or perhaps a witness. A few of the older women in the gallery nodded approvingly at her professional appearance, while younger observers pulled out their phones, sensing something noteworthy about her presence. Officer Dale Griggs, a thick-necked man with 20 years on the force, noticed her immediately. He'd been working courthouse security for the past 5 years and prided himself on reading people. This woman, walking toward the front of the courtroom with such purpose, set off his internal alarms. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she didn't fit his mental picture of who belonged up front. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversations. "Ma'am, you need to take a seat in the back rows. Front section's reserved for legal personnel and press." The woman paused, turning to face him with an expression of polite patience. "Thank you for your concern, officer, but I need to be up front for today's proceedings." "I wasn't asking," Griggs said, stepping into her path. His partner, Officer Tommy Brennan, younger and eager to prove himself, moved to flank her other side. "Back rows are for family members and spectators. That's where you need to be." "Officer," she said, her voice remaining remarkably steady, "I appreciate you doing your job, but there seems to be a misunderstanding. I'm not a spectator." "Look, I don't care if you're the defendant's mother or his prayer circle leader," Griggs snapped, his patience already thin from dealing with the morning crowd. "Rules are rules. Back of the room now." The exchange had drawn attention. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phone cameras shifted subtly in their direction. An elderly white woman in the third row clutched her purse tighter, while a group of young black men near the door exchanged knowing looks, having seen this scene play out too many times before. "Officer Griggs," the woman said, reading his nameplate, "I'm going to reach into my portfolio very slowly to show you something that will clear this up. Don't you reach for anything." Brennan barked, his hand moving to his taser. "Hands where I can see them." The woman froze, her eyebrows raising slightly. "I'm trying to show you my identification." "She's being aggressive," Griggs announced to no one in particular, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, you're interfering with court proceedings. I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." Gasps rippled through the courtroom like wind through wheat. A young woman in the back row had her phone out, recording everything. An older black man shook his head slowly, muttering prayers under his breath. The bailiff, an older gentleman named Harold Washington who'd worked the courthouse for 30 years, looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary," the woman said, but she could see the situation escalating beyond reason. With remarkable composure, she slowly turned around and placed her hands behind her back. "I'm complying with your request, though I want it on record that this is happening under protest." Griggs pulled out his handcuffs, the metal jangling like coins in a pocket. He grabbed her wrists roughly, yanking them together harder than necessary. The cuffs clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent courtroom. "There we go," Griggs said with satisfaction. "Maybe next time you'll listen when an officer gives you a lawful order." The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Some people stood up to get a better view. Others pulled out more phones, the scene now being broadcast live on at least a dozen social media streams. A white woman in her 60s turned to her husband and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "This is outrageous." She wasn't doing anything wrong, but others weren't so sympathetic. A man in a rumpled suit near the prosecution's table smirked and said to his companion, "Probably should have just listened the first time." Through it all, the handcuffed woman stood with her back straight and her head high. The cuffs bit into her wrists, but her face betrayed no discomfort. This dignified resistance seemed to infuriate Griggs even more. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" Brennan sneered, emboldened by his partner's actions. "Bet you wish you just sat where you were told." She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze. "Officer Brennan, I want you to remember this moment. Remember everything you're saying and doing right now." "Is that a threat?" Griggs demanded, spinning her around roughly to face him. "You threatening a police officer?" "It's a promise that this will be remembered," she replied calmly. "Every word, every action, all of it." Griggs leaned in closer, his coffee-stained breath hot on her face. "Know your place, woman. This is a court of law, not some protest rally." The silence that followed his words was deafening. Even those who'd been supporting the officer's actions looked uncomfortable. The phrase hung in the air like a noxious cloud, its implications clear to everyone present. The woman's response was measured, almost gentle. "Do you know mine?" Before Griggs could respond, a young woman in the corner caught everyone's attention by dropping a stack of law books. Maya Brooks, a first-year law intern with the public defender's office, mumbled apologies as she bent to pick them up. But her eyes stayed on the scene, and her phone, propped against her bag, continued recording from a perfect angle. She'd recognized something in the handcuffed woman's bearing, in the way she spoke, that the officers had missed entirely. The commotion had now completely disrupted the courtroom's morning schedule. The clerk, David Reed, nervously approached the bench where Judge Patricia Morrison was supposed to be presiding. But Judge Morrison's chair remained empty, her absence adding another layer of confusion to the chaotic scene. "What is going on here?" demanded a voice from the side door. Court Administrator James Holbrook had entered, drawn by the unusual noise level. "Why are proceedings delayed?" "Just handling a disruptive spectator," Griggs announced proudly. "Situation's under control." But Maya noticed something others hadn't. The handcuffed woman's eyes had shifted to the door leading to the judge's chambers. It wasn't a look of fear or hope for rescue. It was something else entirely, something that looked almost like ownership. The woman stood there in handcuffs, surrounded by chaos she hadn't created, maintaining a composure that seemed almost supernatural. The morning light streaming through the tall windows caught the subtle gold pin on her lapel, a pin that Maya recognized from her law school orientation materials, a pin given only to federal judicial appointments. Officer Griggs guided the handcuffed woman to a wooden bench along the sidewall, the same bench typically reserved for defendants awaiting their hearings. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. She sat down gracefully despite her restrained hands, crossing her ankles and keeping her posture perfect. The courtroom gradually returned to a semblance of order, though whispers continued to ripple through the gallery. People leaned into each other, sharing theories and opinions about what they'd just witnessed. Some took selfies with the scene in the background, already crafting their social media post about injustice in America's courts. "Unbelievable," muttered an older white woman sitting 2 rows back, treating her like a criminal just for wanting a better seat. But her husband disagreed. She should have just followed directions. Courts have rules for a reason. The woman who'd been handcuffed could hear every word, but her expression remained neutral, almost serene. She positioned herself so she could observe the entire courtroom, taking in every face, every reaction, every small detail that others might miss. Prosecutor Whitaker strutted past her bench, his Armani suit and $100 haircut, making him look like he'd stepped out of a legal drama. He was lead prosecutor on the Thompson case, ambitious and ruthless, with political aspirations that everyone knew about, but he pretended to hide. "Well," Whitaker said loudly enough for the gallery to hear, "looks like someone learned the hard way that you can't just walk in here like you own the place." He turned to his assistant district attorney with a smirk. "Good thing we have officers keeping the courtroom safe from people who don't know how to follow simple instructions." A few people laughed nervously, but most remained silent, the discomfort palpable. The handcuffed woman looked at Whitaker with the same steady gaze she'd given the officers, saying nothing but somehow making him feel examined. An elderly black woman, dressed in her Sunday best despite it being Tuesday, slowly made her way over. Dorothy Campbell had been coming to court every day since her grandson's trial 2 years ago, trying to understand the system that had taken him away. She pulled a small bottle of water from her purse. "Here, honey," Dorothy said softly, unscrewing the cap since the woman's hands were still cuffed behind her back. "Don't let them break you. You hold your head up high." "Thank you," the woman replied, accepting a small sip. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Campbell." "Dorothy Campbell. And you don't deserve this treatment. I've been watching these courts for years, and it's always the same story." Officer Brennan immediately intervened. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. No interacting with detained individuals." Dorothy shuffled back to her bench, but not before patting the handcuffed woman's shoulder in solidarity. The gesture was small but powerful, a moment of humanity in an increasingly dehumanizing situation. The court clerk, David Reed, was trying to maintain order at his desk, but he kept glancing over at the woman on the bench. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. When ADA Whitaker loudly misused the term habeas corpus while discussing procedure with a colleague, Reed cringed. "Actually," the handcuffed woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the room, "habeas corpus refers to the legal action through which a person can seek relief from unlawful detention. What you're describing would be more accurately termed a motion to suppress." The entire courtroom turned to stare. Whitaker's face reddened. "I don't recall asking for legal advice from someone in handcuffs." "Free education is still free, counselor," she replied mildly. Even when delivered from this position, Reed's eyes widened. That kind of precise legal knowledge, delivered so casually, wasn't something you picked up from watching Law and Order. He began rifling through his papers, looking for something he'd seen that morning but hadn't paid attention to at the time. The Thompson trial was supposed to resume, but without Judge Morrison, everything was in limbo. The defendant, Marcus Thompson, sat at his table looking confused. He kept staring at the handcuffed woman with an expression of growing recognition. "Your Honor," Thompson suddenly said to the empty bench, then caught himself. Excuse me, but why is she in handcuffs? She's supposed to be." His lawyer quickly hushed him, but the damage was done. The courtroom buzzed with renewed speculation. Who was this woman that the defendant seemed to know? Officer Griggs strutted over to the bench where she sat, enjoying his moment of authority. "This must not be your first time in those restraints," he said with a nasty smile. "You seem awfully comfortable." The woman looked up at him with an expression that might have been pity. "Actually, Officer Griggs, it is my first time being handcuffed, and I assure you it will be the last time." "That right?" Brennan joined in, eager to support his partner. You planning on being a model citizen from now on? No, she said simply. I'm planning on ensuring that officers who abuse their authority face appropriate consequences. Sounds like a threat to me, Griggs said, his hand moving to his radio. Maybe we should add threatening an officer to your charges. Quote me accurately if you file that report, she replied. I said appropriate consequences. The appropriate consequence for false arrest, excessive force, and violation of civil rights under color of law. Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, if you need to look it up. Maya Brooks, the intern in the corner, nearly dropped her phone. She'd been scrolling through her digital copy of the American Bar Association's monthly magazine, and there was a profile from last month. Historic appointments. Meet the newest federal judges. The woman's face stared back at her from the screen, alongside an article about her groundbreaking career and recent appointment to the federal bench. Maya's hand shook as she zoomed in on the image to be sure. She looked from her phone to the woman in handcuffs and back again. It was definitely her. But should she say something? She was just an intern, and these were police officers. The power dynamics made her hesitate. Meanwhile, the courtroom continued its strange paralysis. No one quite knew how to proceed without a judge, but no one wanted to leave either, sensing that something significant was unfolding. That's when the doors opened, and in walked someone who made everyone sit up straighter. Robert Sterling, senior administrative judge for the entire district, entered the courtroom. He rarely made appearances in individual courtrooms, preferring to handle administrative matters from his office. His presence here meant something significant was happening. Sterling's eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent 40 years in law. His gaze lingered on the woman in handcuffs, and something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps mixed with concern. But Sterling said nothing, choosing instead to take a seat in the back row of the gallery. He pulled out a small notebook and began writing, occasionally looking up to observe. It was clear he was documenting everything he saw. Folks, Court Administrator Holbrook announced, trying to regain control, we're still waiting for Judge Morrison. Please remain seated and maintain order. Where's Morrison? Whitaker demanded impatiently. We have a trial to conduct. Judge Morrison has been delayed, Holbrook replied carefully. We're sorting out the situation. The handcuffed woman allowed herself the slightest smile. Perhaps you should check whether Judge Morrison was ever scheduled for this courtroom today, she suggested. Reed, the clerk, frantically flipped through his scheduling book. His face paled as he found what he was looking for. Sir, he said to Holbrook in a voice that cracked, Judge Morrison is in courtroom 2A today. This courtroom for B was supposed to have. He trailed off, looking at the woman in handcuffs with growing horror. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. People sensed they were on the verge of a revelation, though most couldn't quite grasp what it might be. The officers, however, remained oblivious to the shifting mood. Whatever scheduling mix-up you have doesn't concern us, Griggs announced. We're just doing our job, keeping order. The woman looked at him with something approaching sympathy. Officer Griggs, in about 5 minutes, you're going to wish you had done your job. Your actual job, which includes verifying the identity of individuals before taking action against them. You can talk all you want, Brennan scoffed. Doesn't change the fact that you're sitting there in cuffs. No, she agreed. It doesn't change that fact, but will change everything else. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. People were starting to piece together the clues. Her legal knowledge, the defendant's recognition, the scheduling confusion, Sterling's presence, and most of all, her unshakable composure in the face of what anyone else would find humiliating. Maya finally worked up the courage to whisper to another intern beside her, showing him her phone screen. His eyes widened, and he immediately pulled up the court's internal system on his laptop, searching for recent appointments. The divide in the courtroom was becoming more pronounced. Some people, particularly those who'd experienced similar treatment by law enforcement, were growing angry on the woman's behalf. Others, particularly those who believe in strict law and order, maintained that she should have simply complied from the start. But everyone, regardless of their position, could sense that something was about to shift dramatically. The very air seemed charged with impending revelation, like the moment before lightning strikes. The whispers in Courtroom 4B had grown from scattered murmurs to a steady hum of speculation. Maya Brooks kept glancing between her phone screen and the handcuffed woman on the bench, her certainty growing with each passing second. She leaned over to show her fellow intern, Thomas Crawford, the article she'd found. "Look at this," Maya whispered urgently, angling her phone so only Thomas could see. "This is from last month's ABA magazine." "That's her. I'm sure of it." Thomas squinted at the screen, then his eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "But that would mean that they just handcuffed a federal judge," Maya finished, her voice barely audible. Their hushed conversation caught the attention of others nearby. Sarah Williams, a courthouse reporter for the local NBC affiliate, had been live tweeting the incident. She overheard just enough to make her journalistic instincts kick into overdrive. She quietly opened her laptop and began searching for recent judicial appointments. Meanwhile, the woman in handcuffs remained remarkably composed, observing the growing awareness spreading through certain sections of the courtroom like ripples on a pond. Officer Griggs and his partner Brennan stood near her, still oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. "You know," the woman said conversationally to Griggs, "in my experience, the most dangerous moments in law enforcement come not from physical threats, but from assumptions. When we assume we know who someone is based on how they look rather than verifying facts." "Save the philosophy lecture," Griggs replied dismissively. "You could tell it to the judge when one finally shows up." Court Administrator James Holbrook was growing increasingly nervous. He'd just received a text message that made his stomach drop. He approached the clerk's desk where David Reed was still frantically checking his schedules. "David," Holbrook said quietly, "I need you to pull up the official judicial assignment roster for today. The one from the Central Administrative Office." Reed's fingers flew across his keyboard. When the document loaded, his face went pale. "Mr. Holbrook, according to this, Courtroom 4B was assigned to, oh my God." "What?" Prosecutor Whitaker demanded, having overheard. "What's the problem now?" Holbrook took a deep breath. "There seems to be a significant misunderstanding about who was supposed to preside over this courtroom today." Judge Robert Sterling, still sitting in the back row, stood up slowly. His movement drew everyone's attention. Sterling was a legend in the legal community, appointed to the bench by President Clinton and known for his meticulous attention to justice. When he stood, people listened. "Mr. Holbrook," Sterling said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "perhaps you should clarify the situation for everyone present." But before Holbrook could respond, the defendant Marcus Thompson spoke up again, this time more forcefully. "That's Judge Carter," he said, pointing at the handcuffed woman. "She was supposed to hear my case today. I remember from the notice my lawyer showed me. The Honorable Naomi Carter." The name dropped into the courtroom like a stone into still water. Several people immediately pulled out their phones, searching for Judge Naomi Carter. Within seconds, images began loading on dozens of screens throughout the gallery. Prosecutor Whitaker laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's ridiculous. You expect us to believe that this woman is a federal judge? Nice try, but false claims won't help your case, Thompson." "It's not a false claim," Maya said, finding her voice. She stood up, her legs shaking but her conviction firm. "I have the announcement right here from the Federal Judicial Center. Judge Naomi Carter was appointed to the federal bench last month. She was previously the first black woman to serve as chief public defender for this district. She's supposed to be in this courtroom today." "That's impossible," Officer Brennan protested, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "She didn't identify herself. She didn't show any credentials." "I tried to," Judge Carter said calmly. "You'll recall I attempted to reach for my identification, and you threatened me with your taser, Officer Brennan. It's all on your body camera footage, I assume. You are wearing active body cameras, aren't you?" Griggs's hand instinctively went to his chest, where his body camera should have been recording. His face showed a flicker of uncertainty. The gallery was now in full eruption. People were standing, phones were recording, and the morning's events were being recontextualized in real time. The same actions that had seemed like reasonable security measures to some now looked like something far more sinister. "This can't be real," someone said loudly. They arrested a judge? Not arrested. Judge Carter corrected, her legal precision intact despite her circumstances. Detained without cause, handcuffed through excessive force, and denied the opportunity to identify myself. The distinction matters. Sarah Williams, the reporter, had found what she was looking for. "I've got it here," she announced. Judge Naomi Carter, appointed to the Federal District Court for the Eastern District, sworn in 3 weeks ago. There's a photo from her swearing-in ceremony. She turned her laptop screen toward the crowd. The image showed the same woman, now sitting handcuffed on the bench, taking her oath of office in front of the Chief Justice. She was wearing the same navy suit, the same dignified expression, the same quiet strength. The crowd's reaction was volcanic. Some people gasped in horror. Others shouted in anger. A few began calling for the officers' badges. Dorothy Campbell, the elderly woman who'd offered water earlier, shook her head sadly. "Lord have mercy," Dorothy said. "They done handcuffed a judge, a federal judge." But even faced with mounting evidence, Griggs doubled down. "I don't care who she claims to be. She failed to follow lawful orders. She was disrupting court proceedings." "Officer Griggs," Judge Sterling said, walking forward with deliberate steps, "I think it's time you stop talking. Every word you say is being recorded by dozens of cameras, and I assure you, none of it is helping your situation." Whitaker, the prosecutor, was trying to distance himself from the situation. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. If she had simply identified herself from the beginning." She tried to. Maya interjected, her confidence growing. "I recorded the whole thing." She tried to show her identification, and the officers escalated instead. "You recorded it?" Griggs spun toward Maya menacingly. "You can't record in a courthouse without permission." "Actually," Judge Carter said, "she can. This is a public courtroom during public proceedings. The First Amendment protects the right to record public officials performing their public duties." Parker versus City of Boston, if you need the case citation. The court bailiff, Harold Washington, who had remained silent during the initial confrontation, finally stepped forward. He was carrying something in his hands, a black judicial robe, freshly pressed and hanging on a wooden hanger. "Your Honor," Harold said, addressing Judge Carter directly and formally, "I retrieved this from Chambers. It was delivered this morning for you." The simple act of Harold addressing her as "Your Honor" seemed to shift the entire room's energy. It was an acknowledgement from someone in authority, a crack in the wall of denial that Griggs and Brennan had built. "You can't give her that," Griggs protested. "She's in custody." "On what charge?" Judge Sterling asked pointedly. "What specific crime has she been charged with, Officer Griggs?" Griggs stammered, "Disrupting court proceedings, failure to comply with lawful orders, possible threatening of an officer." "None of which you've actually formally charged," Sterling noted. "You've simply handcuffed a woman without processing any actual arrest, which means this is technically false imprisonment." The legal weight of Sterling's words hit the room hard. False imprisonment of a federal judge. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a potential federal crime. Maya had pulled up more information on her laptop. "Your Honor," she said, addressing Judge Carter directly, "I found your appointment letter in the Public Federal Registry. It specifically states you were assigned to begin hearing cases in Courtroom starting today." "That's correct," Judge Carter confirmed. "My first day on the bench was supposed to begin with the Thompson matter at 9:30 a.m. We're now 45 minutes behind schedule." The crowd in the gallery was growing more agitated. Some people were calling for the officers to be arrested immediately. Others were demanding that Judge Carter be released from the handcuffs at once. The situation was spiraling toward chaos. "Everyone calm down," Judge Sterling commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're going to handle this properly and by the law." He turned to Officers Griggs and Brennan. "Officers, you need to remove those handcuffs immediately." Griggs hesitated, his pride warring with the growing realization of what he'd done. I need authorization from my supervisor." "I'm giving you authorization," Sterling said firmly. "As senior administrative judge of this district, I'm ordering you to release Judge Carter immediately." "You can't order us," Brennan said weakly. You're not our supervisor. No, but I can hold you in contempt of court, Sterling replied. And I can have the U.S. Marshals, who do answer to the federal courts, take you into custody. Your choice, officers. The standoff lasted only seconds more before Griggs reached for his keys. His hands were shaking as he approached Judge Carter, who stood and turned around calmly, presenting her cuffed wrists. The click of the handcuffs opening seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. Red marks were visible on Judge Carter's wrists where the metal had pressed too tightly against her skin. She rubbed them briefly, then straightened her suit jacket. "Thank you, Judge Sterling," she said with quiet dignity. Then she turned to Harold, the bailiff. "Mr. Washington, I'll take that robe now." Harold Washington held out the judicial robe with the reverence it deserved. Judge Naomi Carter took it with steady hands, but she didn't put it on immediately. Instead, she stood there for a moment, letting the full weight of what had transpired sink in for everyone present. "Before I assume the bench," Judge Carter said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom, "I want to make something crystal clear. What happened here this morning was not an isolated incident. It was not a simple misunderstanding. It was a manifestation of assumptions and biases that plague our justice system every single day." Officer Griggs had backed away, his face cycling through emotions: disbelief, fear, anger, and finally a desperate attempt at damage control. "Your Honor, I was just doing my job. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Judge Carter replied. "You saw a black woman in your courtroom and made assumptions about where I belonged. You denied me the opportunity to identify myself. You escalated a situation that required no escalation. And most tellingly, you told me to know my place." The crowd winced at the reminder of those words. Several people who had been recording made sure their phones were still capturing every moment. "This is all being blown out of proportion," Prosecutor Whitaker interjected, trying to salvage something from the disaster. "Surely we can handle this administratively without making a federal case out of it." Judge Carter turned her steady gaze on him. "Mr. Whitaker, you publicly mocked me while I sat in handcuffs. You made jokes about keeping the courtroom safe from people like me. Your words are on record. Multiple records, in fact." She gestured to the gallery, where dozens of phones were still recording. "We live in an age where accountability can no longer hide in the shadows. Everything that happened here was witnessed, recorded, and will be preserved." Maya Brooks stepped forward again, holding her laptop. "Your Honor, I have the entire incident recorded from multiple angles. I've already uploaded it to a secure cloud server to preserve the chain of evidence." "Smart thinking, Ms. Brooks," Judge Carter said, recognizing the intern for the first time. "What's your name and position?" "Maya Brooks, Your Honor. I'm a first-year intern with the Public Defender's Office." "Well, Ms. Brooks, your quick thinking and courage in documenting this incident despite the potential risk to yourself shows exactly the kind of integrity we need in our legal system. Please see me after proceedings. We need to discuss your future." Maya's face flushed with a mixture of pride and relief. She'd taken a risk standing up, and it had been recognized. Judge Carter then walked over to Dorothy Campbell, the elderly woman who'd offered her water. "Mrs. Campbell, thank you for your kindness. In a moment when others either participated in or silently witnessed my humiliation, you showed compassion. That matters." Dorothy nodded, tears in her eyes. "Just did what was right, Your Honor." "Exactly," Judge Carter said. "You did what was right when it wasn't easy or popular. That's the definition of integrity." She then turned back to the room at large. "Now, I'm going to take the bench, and we're going to proceed with the day's cases. But first, there are matters that must be addressed." Judge Carter walked behind the bench to the judge's chambers. A few minutes later, she emerged wearing the black robe, the transformation complete. She ascended to the judge's seat with measured steps, each one seeming to reclaim the dignity that had been attempted to be stripped from her. "All rise," Bailiff Washington called out, following proper protocol even though the morning had been anything but proper. The entire courtroom stood, including Officers Griggs and Brennan, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Carter took her seat, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the assembled crowd. "Please be seated," she said. The room sat down with a collective rustle. This court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Naomi Carter presiding. The formal announcement of her title sent another wave through the room. It was official now, undeniable. The woman they'd seen handcuffed and humiliated was now the highest authority in the room. Before we address the matter of People versus Thompson, Judge Carter continued, there are urgent administrative matters to address. Bailiff Washington, please ensure all exits are secured. No one leaves this courtroom until I dismiss them. Harold moved to comply, and several people in the gallery shifted nervously. First, Judge Carter said, I'm ordering the immediate preservation of all evidence related to this morning's incident. Mr. Reed, as clerk of this court, you are directed to secure all courthouse security footage from 8:30 a.m. to present. Every angle, every camera, no exceptions. David Reed nodded vigorously, typing rapidly on his computer. Yes, Your Honor. I'm sending the preservation order to security now. Second, Officers Griggs and Brennan, please approach the bench. The two officers walked forward like men approaching their execution. They stood before the judge's bench, looking up at the woman they'd handcuffed less than an hour ago. Officers, I want to be very clear about what's going to happen next, Judge Carter said. You are both hereby ordered to preserve all body camera footage from this morning. You are not to delete, edit, or tamper with that footage in any way. Any attempt to do so will result in additional federal charges for evidence tampering. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, they both mumbled. Furthermore, you are both potential subjects of a federal investigation for deprivation of rights under color of law, a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 242. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. I strongly suggest you exercise both rights. Griggs's face had gone from red to pale. Your Honor, can't we work this out? Officer Griggs, you asked me if I knew my place. Let me tell you what my place is. My place is to ensure that justice is administered fairly and equally to all who enter this courtroom. My place is to protect the constitutional rights of every citizen, including the right to be free from unlawful detention. My place is to hold accountable those who abuse their power under color of law. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your actions this morning were witnessed by over 100 people and recorded by dozens of cameras. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure. You potentially violated my civil rights under federal law. And you did it all with an arrogance that suggested you believed you were untouchable. We didn't know you were a judge, Brennan protested weakly. And if I hadn't been a judge? Judge Carter asked. If I had been exactly who you thought I was, a black woman who was just a spectator, would your actions have been justified then? The question hung in the air, its implications clear. The officers had no good answer because there was no good answer. Your Honor, Judge Sterling spoke up from the gallery. If I may approach? Please do, Judge Sterling. Sterling walked to the front of the courtroom. Your Honor, given that you're the victim in this matter, you should not be the one to adjudicate any charges or disciplinary actions against these officers. I recommend we immediately contact the Chief Judge's office to appoint a special master to investigate and handle this matter. I agree completely, Judge Carter said. I'm recusing myself from any direct disciplinary proceedings against Officers Griggs and Brennan. However, I am within my authority to refer this matter to the appropriate authorities. She turned to her clerk. Mr. Reed, please contact the U.S. Attorney's Office for this district. Inform them that I'm making a formal referral for investigation of potential civil rights violations. Also, contact the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They need to be aware of this incident. Yes, Your Honor, Reed said, picking up his phone immediately. Prosecutor Whitaker was sweating now. Your Honor, surely my comments don't rise to the level of... Mr. Whitaker, Judge Carter interrupted. Your conduct this morning showed a disturbing lack of professionalism and potentially revealed bias that could affect your ability to prosecute cases fairly. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the State Bar and the District Attorney's Office. You may want to contact your own attorney. The crowd in the gallery was riveted. They were witnessing something unprecedented. immediate accountability for actions that usually went unpunished. Several people were live streaming to social media, and the viewer counts were climbing rapidly. Now, Judge Carter said, "Officers Griggs and Brennan, you are dismissed from this courtroom. You are not to return to this courthouse until further notice. U.S. Marshals will escort you out and ensure you turn over your body cameras to federal authorities." 2 U.S. Marshals, who had been summoned during the proceedings, stepped forward. Unlike the local police, they answered directly to the federal court system. They positioned themselves on either side of Griggs and Brennan. "This is ridiculous," Griggs muttered as he was escorted out. "I was just doing my job." "Your job," Judge Carter said, her voice following him to the door, "was to protect and serve. You failed at both." After the officers were removed, the courtroom seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. But Judge Carter wasn't finished. "Ms. Brooks," she called out, "please approach." Maya walked forward on shaking legs, clutching her laptop. "Your quick thinking and documenting this incident was invaluable," Judge Carter said. "You showed courage in preserving evidence, even when it might have put you at risk of retaliation. What year are you in law school?" "I'm a 2L at State University, Your Honor. I'll be speaking with the public defender about creating a special position for you in my chambers," Judge Carter said. "We need more young lawyers who understand that sometimes justice requires courage, not just knowledge of the law." Maya's eyes widened. A position in a federal judge's chambers was a golden opportunity that could launch her entire career. "Thank you, Your Honor." "I thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Judge Carter said with a slight smile. "I have very high standards, but something tells me you'll meet them." She then addressed the entire courtroom. "Let me be clear about something. What happened here today was not about me. Yes, I was the victim, but I have resources, knowledge, and now a position of power to address what happened to me. Most people who experience this kind of treatment don't have those advantages." She paused, looking at the faces in the gallery. Every day, in courtrooms across this country, people are prejudged based on their appearance, their race, their economic status. They're denied basic dignity and respect. They're assumed to be guilty, dangerous, or simply out of place. What happened to me happens to countless others, but their stories don't go viral. Their humiliation isn't vindicated by a dramatic revelation. Several people in the gallery nodded, some wiping away tears. They recognized their own experiences in her words. "So while I will pursue justice for what happened to me today," Judge Carter continued, "I want everyone here to understand that this is bigger than one incident. This is about systemic change. This is about ensuring that everyone who enters this courtroom, whether they're a federal judge or a first-time defendant, is treated with the dignity and respect that our Constitution demands." She looked at the prosecution table where Whitaker sat, looking considerably less smug than he had an hour ago. "Mr. Whitaker, given your conduct this morning and my concerns about your ability to prosecute fairly, I'm considering whether you should be allowed to continue as prosecutor on the Thompson case. I'll make that determination after a recess." Then she turned to the defense table. "Mr. Thompson, I apologize that your case has been delayed by this morning's events. You deserve a fair and timely trial, and you will receive one." Thompson nodded, still looking somewhat stunned by everything he'd witnessed. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," Judge Carter announced. "When we return, we'll proceed with the Thompson matter. But let me leave you with this thought. Justice is not just about the verdicts we render or the sentences we impose. It's about how we treat each other within these walls. It's about recognizing the humanity and dignity of every person who enters this space." She stood, and the courtroom immediately rose with her. And sometimes, justice requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our systems. Today was one of those times. Court is in recess. As Judge Carter left for her chambers, the courtroom exploded in conversation. People were calling friends, posting on social media, and discussing what they'd witnessed. The phrase "they handcuffed a judge" was already trending nationally on Twitter. Sarah Williams, the reporter, was doing a live stand-up for her station. In an extraordinary turn of events, what began as a routine court day turned into a powerful demonstration of both injustice and accountability. Judge Naomi Carter, on her first day on the federal bench, was handcuffed and detained by court officers who assumed she didn't belong. The implications of this incident are still unfolding. In her chambers, Judge Carter sat down at her desk and finally allowed herself a moment to process what had happened. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs. She could have been just another statistic, another story of injustice that went nowhere. But she had the power to make this moment matter, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. There would be formal complaints to file, investigations to monitor, and reforms to push for. But first, she had a trial to oversee. Because that's what judges do. They ensure justice continues, even when they themselves have been denied it. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maya Brooks, holding a cup of tea. "I thought you might need this, Your Honor," Maya said quietly. Judge Carter accepted the tea gratefully. "Thank you, Ms. Brooks. And thank you for your courage earlier. It would have been easier to stay silent." "My grandmother always told me," Maya replied, "that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. I couldn't be complicit." Judge Carr nodded. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. Now, let's prepare for the Thompson case. Justice doesn't stop for anything, not even for this." As they prepared to return to the courtroom, both women knew that what happened that morning would have repercussions far beyond Courtroom 4B. The video clips were already spreading across the internet. News outlets were picking up the story. Civil rights organizations were preparing statements. But in that moment, their focus was on the immediate task at hand, ensuring that justice, real justice, would be served in their courtroom. Because that's where all change begins, with individuals deciding to do better, to be better, and to demand better from the systems they serve. When Judge Carter retook the bench after the recess, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread throughout the courthouse and beyond. Everyone wanted to witness history in the making. "Before we proceed with People versus Thompson," Judge Carter said, looking directly at the cameras that were now openly recording, "I want to address those who will see this beyond these walls. What you witnessed today was not scripted or planned. It was real life intersecting with systemic bias. But it was also accountability in action, and that's what gives me hope." She turned to the prosecution and defense tables. "Now, let's proceed with the business of justice. And let's do it right this time." The 30-minute recess had transformed Courtroom 4B into something resembling a media command center. Reporters lined the hallways, their cameras and microphones ready. But inside the courtroom itself, Judge Naomi Carter had established a different atmosphere entirely. When she retook the bench, her demeanor was controlled, professional, and focused on the law rather than personal vindication. "Before we proceed," Judge Carter announced, her voice steady and clear, "I need to establish several administrative orders to preserve the integrity of what transpired here this morning." She turned to the court clerk, David Reed, who sat with his fingers poised over his keyboard. "Mr. Reed, please document the following order. All security footage from this courthouse, specifically covering the period from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. today, is to be immediately preserved and sealed. This includes footage from all corridors leading to Courtroom 4B, the courtroom itself, and any areas where Officers Griggs and Brennan were present." Reed typed rapidly, reading back. "Preservation order entered at 10:47 a.m., September 3rd, Your Honor." Additionally, Judge Carter continued, "I'm ordering the preservation of all body camera footage from Officers Griggs and Brennan. The timestamp I'm specifically interested in begins at 9:14 a.m. and continues through 10:15 a.m. This order is to be communicated immediately to the Police Department's Internal Affairs Division." A man in a dark suit near the back of the courtroom stood up. "Your Honor, I'm Lieutenant Marcus Powell from Internal Affairs. We've already begun securing that footage." "Thank you, Lieutenant Powell," Judge Carter acknowledged. "Please ensure the chain of custody is documented to the second. I want every transfer, every access, every viewing logged and witnessed." "Understood, Your Honor." Judge Carter then did something that surprised everyone in the room. "Now, regarding any disciplinary proceedings against Officers Griggs and Brennan, I am formally recusing myself from any adjudication." As the victim of their actions, it would be inappropriate for me to oversee their discipline or potential prosecution. Prosecutor Whitaker, who had been silent since the recess, looked confused. Your Honor, you have every right to... I have every right to ensure justice is served properly, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Carter interrupted. And proper justice means avoiding even the appearance of bias or revenge. I'm directing that Chief Judge Eleanor Pierce assign an independent judge to oversee any contempt proceedings or disciplinary hearings related to this morning's incident. She made another note. Officers Griggs and Brennan are hereby placed on administrative hold from this courtroom pending that hearing. They are not to enter this courtroom or have any interaction with its staff without explicit permission from Chief Judge Pierce or her designee. The measured, professional way she handled the situation made it clear that this wasn't about personal revenge. It was about systematic accountability. Several lawyers in the gallery exchanged impressed looks. This was how you wielded authority responsibly. Bailiff Washington, Judge Carter addressed Harold, who stood at attention. Please escort Officers Griggs and Brennan to Anteroom C. They're to wait there for internal affairs. This is not a perp walk, not a spectacle. They're to be treated with the professional courtesy they failed to extend to me. Harold nodded and moved to comply. As Griggs and Brennan were quietly escorted out through a side door, avoiding the main hallway full of cameras, Judge Carter turned her attention back to the case at hand. Now, regarding People versus Thompson, she said, refocusing the room's attention. We have a suppression hearing scheduled that's already been delayed by this morning's events. Mr. Thompson deserves his day in court without further interruption. She looked at the defense table. Defense counsel, are you prepared to proceed? Marcus Thompson's lawyer, James Patterson, stood. Your Honor, given the unusual circumstances and the involvement of some of the same officers in my client's case, I'd like to request a brief conference. Approach, Judge Carter instructed. Both Patterson and Whitaker approached the bench for a sidebar conversation. Judge Carter covered the microphone and leaned forward. Counsel, were any of the officers scheduled to testify today involved in this morning's incident? Patterson nodded. Officer Brennan was one of the arresting officers in my client's case, Your Honor. Judge Carter considered this. Mr. Whitaker, given Officer Brennan's current situation and the questions it raises about his credibility and judgment, will the state be proceeding with him as a witness? Whitaker hesitated, clearly calculating his options. Your Honor, perhaps we could substitute another officer who was present at the arrest. That's acceptable, assuming the defense has no objection and proper notice is given, Judge Carter said. Mr. Patterson, we need to review any substitute witnesses' reports and body camera footage first, Your Honor. Reasonable, Judge Carter agreed. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. That gives both sides time to prepare. Mr. Whitaker, please provide the defense with all relevant materials by 3 p.m. today. As the lawyers returned to their tables, Judge Carter addressed someone else who had been quietly observing from the gallery. Ms. Brooks, please approach. Maya Brooks walked forward, still clutching her laptop and phone. Ms. Brooks, I'm appointing you as a special court clerk for the purpose of maintaining and organizing all documentation related to this morning's incident, Judge Carter said. You've already shown initiative in preserving evidence. I'm formalizing that role. You'll be compensated at the standard clerk rate, and this appointment is effective immediately. Yes, Your Honor, Maya said, barely containing her excitement. I'll need you to coordinate with Mr. Reed to ensure all recordings, witness statements, and documentation are properly cataloged, Judge Carter continued. This is now part of the official court record. This move was strategic. By making Maya an official part of the court staff, even temporarily, Judge Carter was providing her with legal protection. Any attempt to intimidate or silence Maya would now be an attack on a court officer. Judge Carter then turned to the gallery, where Dorothy Campbell still sat in the third row. Mrs. Campbell, I'd like to thank you again for your kindness earlier. Court staff will ensure you have a seat in the front row for any proceedings you wish to observe. You've earned that courtesy. Dorothy smiled warmly, nodding her appreciation. Now, Judge Carter continued, addressing the broader courtroom. Before we recess, I need to address the elephant in the room. Mr. Whitaker, your conduct this morning raises serious questions about your ability to prosecute cases in this courtroom without bias. Whitaker stood, his face flushed. Your Honor, I've been a prosecutor for 15 years. One comment, made in a moment of... One comment. Judge Carter asked. Mr. Whitaker, you made multiple comments while I sat handcuffed. You mocked the idea of keeping the courtroom safe from people like me. You call me street smart, not book smart. These weren't offhand remarks. They revealed a pattern of thinking that could affect your prosecutorial decisions. She pulled out a form from her desk. I'm filing a formal complaint with the State Bar's Ethics Committee. Additionally, I'm requesting that the District Attorney's Office review your recent cases for any patterns of bias in charging decisions or plea negotiations, particularly regarding defendants of color. This is outrageous, Whitaker protested. You can't derail my career because of a misunderstanding. I'm not derailing anything, Mr. Whitaker. I am ensuring accountability. If your record is clean and your prosecutorial decisions have been fair and unbiased, you have nothing to worry about. But that determination will be made by the appropriate authorities, not by me. She signed the complaint form with deliberate strokes. In the meantime, you may continue to prosecute the Thompson case, but be advised that I'll be scrutinizing every motion, every argument, and every piece of evidence for any hint of bias or impropriety. The tension in the room was palpable. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation some had expected. Instead, it was something more powerful, systematic, methodical accountability through proper legal channels. One more matter before we recess, Judge Carter said. I'm issuing a protective order. Anyone who attempts to alter, delete, or destroy any recordings or evidence related to this morning's incident will face federal charges for obstruction of justice and contempt of court. This includes social media posts, cell phone videos, and any other documentation. She looked directly at the cameras that were recording. To be clear, I'm not ordering anyone to delete or hide anything. Quite the opposite. I'm ordering that everything be preserved. The public has a right to see what happened here today. Read time stamped the order at 11:03 a.m., making it official. Court is in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Judge Carter announced. Mr. Thompson, you're released on your existing bond conditions. Please be here promptly tomorrow. As she stood to leave, the entire courtroom rose with her. But before she could exit, a voice called out from the gallery. Your Honor. Judge Carter paused and turned. It was a young black man, probably in his 20s, wearing a fast food uniform. He'd clearly come to court on his lunch break. Your Honor, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, what happened to you today? It happens to us all the time. But nobody ever does anything about it. Thank you for not letting them get away with it. Judge Carter nodded slowly. What's your name, sir? Deshawn. Deshawn Harris. Mr. Harris, you're right. This does happen all the time. And that's precisely why we can't let it slide when we have the power to address it. Change doesn't come from accepting injustice. It comes from demanding better, consistently and persistently. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Everyone in this courtroom has the power to demand better. Whether you're recording with your phone, writing to your representatives, or simply refusing to stay silent when you witness injustice. That's how systems change, one act of courage at a time. With that, she left for her chambers, leaving a courtroom full of people who felt they'd witnessed something historic. By the next morning, the incident had exploded across national media. The hashtag Judge Carter Handcuffed was trending worldwide. But inside Courtroom 4B, Judge Carter was focused on something the cameras hadn't caught, a pattern that suggested this wasn't an isolated incident. Lieutenant Powell from Internal Affairs was the first to testify in the sealed administrative hearing that Judge Carter had requested. Only essential personnel were present. Judge Sterling as the presiding judge, court reporter, and the lawyers representing the various parties. Your Honor, Lieutenant Powell began, addressing Judge Sterling, our initial investigation has revealed some concerning issues with the body camera footage from yesterday morning. What kind of issues? Sterling asked. Officers Griggs and Brennan's body cameras were both powered off during crucial portions of the incident. Officer Griggs's camera stopped recording at 9:13 a.m., 1 minute before the confrontation with Judge Carter began. Officer Brennan's was off from 9:10 a.m. until 9:47 a.m. Maya Brooks, now officially serving as special clerk, was taking detailed notes on her laptop. She raised her hand slightly. "Yes, Ms. Brooks?" Judge Sterling acknowledged. "Your Honor, I have the device logs that were subpoenaed from the equipment room. According to these records, both cameras were functioning properly when checked out this morning. They show no technical malfunctions." Sterling frowned. "So we're to believe both cameras coincidentally stopped working just before this incident?" "That's the claim, Your Honor," Powell said carefully. "However, we've discovered something else. The doc metadata shows Officer Griggs's camera was manually synced to the station database at 10:22 a.m. after the incident but before we secured the devices." "Meaning what exactly?" Sterling asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "Meaning someone accessed the footage during that sync. Whether anything was deleted or altered, we're still investigating." From her position at the prosecution table, where she was observing the proceedings, Judge Carter maintained her composure, but she was taking mental notes. This was bigger than just two officers making a bad decision. The court's IT manager, Priya Nair, was called next. She was a small woman with thick glasses and an air of precision about her. "Ms. Nair," Sterling began, "what can you tell us about attempts to access the courthouse security footage from yesterday?" Priya pulled out a tablet, swiping through data. "At 9:58 a.m. yesterday, someone used a guest workstation in room 203 to attempt to access our security system. They tried to delete corridor footage from the 9th floor, specifically the hallway leading to Courtroom 4B. Were they successful?" "No, Your Honor. Our system requires dual authorization for any deletions. But they did manage to view the footage and attempted to copy it to an external drive." "Do we know who?" "The guest workstation was accessed using a key card assigned to the security supervisor's office. The specific card belongs to Sergeant Dale Mitchell." Judge Carter and Maya exchanged glances. The web was expanding. Sterling called for a brief recess. During the break, Maya approached Judge Carter with her laptop. "Your Honor, I've been researching, and I've found something. This isn't the first time something like this has happened in this courthouse." She showed Judge Carter a series of local news articles, all from the past year. 3 separate incidents where black spectators were removed from courtrooms or detained by security. In each case, the body camera footage was either missing or corrupted. Judge Carter studied the articles carefully. "And let me guess, Officers Griggs and Brennan were involved?" "Griggs was involved in 2 of them. Different partners each time," Maya confirmed. "But here's the interesting part. In all 3 cases, ADA Whitaker was the prosecutor." The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't just about racial bias. It was about controlling the courtroom, controlling who could observe, possibly even influencing outcomes. When court resumed, the defense attorney James Patterson made a surprising revelation. "Your Honor," Patterson addressed Sterling, "I'd like to submit into evidence a brief showing similar patterns in 3 recent cases." He handed over a document. Each involved black defendants. Each had mysterious issues with video evidence, and each resulted in convictions based primarily on officer testimony. Sterling reviewed the brief, his expression growing more concerned with each page. "This is serious, Mr. Patterson. Are you alleging a conspiracy?" "I'm alleging a pattern, Your Honor. A pattern that deserves investigation." Just then, David Reed, the regular court clerk, raised his hand nervously. "Your Honor, I have something that might be relevant." Sterling nodded for him to continue. "Yesterday morning, before court began, Officer Griggs came to me with an unusual request. He asked for what he called a private gallery sweep. He wanted to review who would be in the courtroom before proceedings began. I found it odd, so I made a note in my handwritten ledger." Reed produced an old-fashioned logbook, pointing to an entry time-stamped at 8:45 a.m. He specifically asked if any outsiders or troublemakers were expected. When I asked what he meant, he said he wanted to keep the courtroom clean. I didn't understand at the time, but now. The implication was clear. Griggs had been trying to control who could observe court proceedings, possibly to prevent oversight of questionable practices. Maya's phone buzzed with a text. She read it quickly, then showed it to Judge Carter. It was from another intern at the public defender's office. Check Whitaker's texts. Someone leaked screenshots to the press. Within minutes, the leaked texts were being discussed in hushed tones throughout the courthouse. In messages to Officer Griggs from the night before, Whitaker had written, "Keep the room calm tomorrow. No scenes." Another message read, "If someone mouths off, remove them. Can't have disruptions during Thompson." The text suggested coordination between the prosecutor and the officers, a plan to control the courtroom environment. But they never expected the disruption to be a federal judge. After the lunch break, an unexpected witness appeared. A man in a gray suit who'd been lurking around the courthouse was brought in by Internal Affairs. He was identified as Robert Claiborne, a private investigator. Under questioning, Claiborne admitted he'd been hired to monitor certain court proceedings and report on potential problems. When pressed on who hired him, he invoked attorney-client privilege, but the damage was done. Someone was paying to have the courtroom watched and controlled. Maya had been furiously researching during the testimony. She passed a note to Judge Carter. Claiborne is licensed but has 2 complaints for witness intimidation. Both cases involve civil rights lawsuits against the police department. The picture was becoming clearer by the hour. This wasn't just about 2 racist cops making a mistake. This was about a system designed to control narratives, suppress observation, and ensure certain outcomes. Chief Judge Eleanor Pierce entered the courtroom unexpectedly. A formidable woman in her 70s with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, she commanded immediate respect. "I've been monitoring these proceedings," she announced. "Based on what I've heard, I'm ordering a comprehensive review of all cases in this courthouse over the past 2 years where body camera footage was missing or corrupted. Additionally, I'm establishing a 3-judge panel to investigate the allegations of coordinated misconduct." She looked at Whitaker, who had been growing paler with each revelation. "Mr. Whitaker, you are suspended from prosecuting any cases in this courthouse pending this investigation. The district attorney will need to assign new prosecutors to all your current cases." Whitaker stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "This is a witch hunt. I've done nothing wrong except make a few poor comments in a moment of confusion." "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," Chief Judge Pierce said coldly. "Your text messages suggest this was more than momentary confusion. They suggest premeditation." She then turned to Judge Carter. "Judge Carter, I want to commend you for your restraint and professionalism in handling this matter. You've turned what could have been a personal vendetta into a systematic examination of institutional problems." "Thank you, Chief Judge," Judge Carter replied. "But this isn't about me. It's about ensuring that everyone who enters these courtrooms receives equal treatment under the law." As the afternoon wore on, more evidence emerged. A paralegal from Whitaker's office came forward with emails showing he'd regularly communicated with certain officers about maintaining order during sensitive cases. A court reporter revealed she'd been asked to edit transcripts to remove certain exchanges, though she'd refused. The pattern was undeniable, a coordinated effort to control courtroom narratives, particularly in cases involving defendants of color or civil rights issues. By 4 p.m., Lieutenant Powell had compiled enough evidence to expand the investigation. "We're looking at potential federal charges," he announced. "This goes beyond simple misconduct. We're talking about conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights." Judge Carter finally spoke up from her observation position. "I want to make something clear. What we've uncovered here isn't unique to this courthouse. Similar patterns exist in courtrooms across the country. The difference is, this time it was caught on camera. This time, there were witnesses. This time, someone in a position of power was the victim, so it couldn't be ignored or explained away." She stood, addressing everyone present. "The real tragedy is all the times this happened when no one was recording, when the victim had no recourse, when the system protected itself instead of protecting justice." Maya had been live tweeting the revelations, with Judge Carter's permission, ensuring transparency in the proceedings. The public reaction was swift and fierce. Calls for reform were coming from civil rights organizations, legal associations, and even some politicians. As the day's proceedings concluded, Judge Sterling announced the immediate implementation of several reforms: mandatory body camera activation for all courthouse interactions, independent review of any missing footage, and regular audits of courtroom security practices. These are just first steps, Sterling said. The three-judge panel will recommend comprehensive reforms within 30 days. As everyone prepared to leave, Judge Carter called Maya over. Ms. Brooks, your work today has been invaluable. You've shown that one person paying attention, documenting, and asking questions can expose systematic problems. Don't ever underestimate the power of bearing witness. Maya nodded, understanding the weight of the responsibility. Your Honor, what happens next? Now we do the hard work, Judge Carter replied. We take what we've exposed and use it to build something better, case by case, reform by reform, until the system actually delivers on its promise of equal justice under law. The morning of September 5th brought an unusual energy to the courthouse. In Courtroom 4B, Judge Naomi Carter presided over the continuation of the Thompson suppression hearing. While 3 floors up, the disciplinary panel convened to address the officer's conduct. The entire building seemed to pulse with anticipation. Judge Carter sat at her bench, reviewing notes as the courtroom filled. The gallery was packed again, but this time with a different mix of observers. Law students, civil rights attorneys, and community activists had joined the regular court watchers. Maya Brooks sat at the special clerk's desk, her laptop ready to document everything. Good morning, Judge Carter began, her voice carrying its now familiar tone of calm authority. We're resuming the suppression hearing in People v. Thompson. Defense counsel, you may call your first witness. James Patterson stood. Your Honor, the defense calls Officer Raymond Torres, formerly of the department's training division. Torres, a stocky man in his 50s with graying temples, took the stand. He'd retired 6 months earlier after 25 years on the force, and his testimony would prove explosive. Officer Torres, Patterson began, can you describe the stop-and-frisk training you provided to patrol units? Torres shifted uncomfortably. We trained officers to identify suspicious behavior and conduct stops within constitutional limits. Were there unofficial guidelines that differed from official policy? Prosecutor Whitaker's replacement, ADA Jennifer Stone, objected. Relevance, Your Honor? I'll allow it, Judge Carter ruled. The defense is challenging the constitutionality of the stop. Training practices are relevant to establish whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. Torres took a deep breath. There were informal quotas. Supervisors wanted numbers, especially in what they called high-yield corridors. Officers who didn't meet expectations faced poor evaluations. Can you define high-yield corridors? Patterson asked. Areas where stops were more likely to result in arrests or citations. They happened to overlap with predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Carter maintained her neutral expression, but she was taking detailed notes. Did Officer Brennan receive this training? Patterson continued. Yes, he was actually singled out for praise because his stop numbers were consistently high. Patterson introduced a document into evidence. This is Officer Brennan's training evaluation. Can you read the highlighted portion? Torres read. Officer shows excellent initiative in proactive policing. Stop productivity exceeds department average by 340%. 340% above average, Patterson repeated. Was there any evaluation of whether these stops were constitutional? Not really, Torres admitted. The focus was on quantity, not quality. Judge Carter interjected with a question. Officer Torres, in your experience, what percentage of these stops resulted in finding actual criminal activity? Torres looked down. Less than 8%, Your Honor. So 92% of the people stopped were innocent. Yes, Your Honor. The weight of that statistic hung in the air. Judge Carter made another note, then nodded for Patterson to continue. Next, the defense called Dr. Angela Washington, a data analyst who specialized in criminal justice statistics. She presented a heat map on a large screen, showing stop-and-frisk incidents over the past 3 years. As you can see, Dr. Washington explained, the concentration of stops directly correlates with racial demographics, not crime rates. Areas with similar crime statistics but different racial compositions show dramatically different stop rates. She clicked to another slide. Mr. Thompson was stopped in this zone here. Based on our model, a black male in that area is 3.7 times more likely to be stopped than a white male, regardless of behavior. Judge Carter studied the data carefully. Dr. Washington, what's the margin of error on these calculations? Plus or minus 0.3, Your Honor. The pattern is statistically significant beyond any reasonable doubt. ADA Stone tried to salvage the situation on cross-examination. Dr. Washington, isn't it possible these areas simply have more criminal activity? I control for that variable, Dr. Washington replied calmly. When comparing areas with identical crime rates, the racial disparity in stops remains consistent. During the morning break, Maya showed Judge Carter something on her phone. Your Honor, the disciplinary panel upstairs just released a statement. They're going to allow live audio streaming of the afternoon session. Judge Carter nodded. Transparency is crucial. The public has a right to witness accountability in action. When court resumed, Patterson played body camera footage from Mr. Thompson's arrest. But this wasn't from Brennan's camera. That was mysteriously corrupted. This was from Officer Janet Miller, who'd arrived as backup. The footage showed Thompson's car at a green light, contradicting Brennan's report that claimed he'd run a red light. It also captured Brennan's words off camera, another one for the quota board. Objection, Stone called out. That's prejudicial and taken out of context. What context would make that statement appropriate, Counselor? Judge Carter asked. Stone had no good answer. Patterson then delivered his closing argument. Your Honor, we've shown that Mr. Thompson was stopped not because of any traffic violation or suspicious behavior, but because he fit a profile in a system designed to generate numbers, not justice. The evidence obtained from this unconstitutional stop must be suppressed. Stone's rebuttal was weak, focusing on technical procedures rather than addressing the core constitutional issues. She knew she was fighting a losing battle. Judge Carter took a brief recess to consider her ruling. When she returned, the courtroom fell silent. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures, she began. The evidence presented shows that Mr. Thompson was stopped without reasonable suspicion, as part of a pattern and practice that violates constitutional protections. The stop was pretextual, motivated not by observed criminal activity, but by racial profiling disguised as proactive policing. She looked directly at Thompson. Mr. Thompson, your Fourth Amendment rights were violated. The evidence obtained during the stop and subsequent search is hereby suppressed and cannot be used against you at trial. Thompson's eyes filled with tears. His lawyer patted his shoulder as murmurs of approval came from the gallery. Furthermore, Judge Carter continued, this court is referring the matter of these systematic practices to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division for investigation of potential pattern or practice violations. At 2 p.m., everyone who could fit squeezed into Courtroom 7A for the disciplinary panel hearing. 3 senior judges presided, Judge Robert Sterling, Judge Margaret O'Brien, and Judge Thomas Park. The room was smaller than 4B, creating an intimate atmosphere that made every word feel weightier. Judge Carter sat in the back row, maintaining her dignity as both observer and victim. Maya sat beside her, laptop ready. Officer Griggs was called first. He walked to the witness stand like a man approaching his execution, his earlier bravado completely gone. Officer Griggs, Judge Sterling began, you've been with the department for 20 years. Can you explain your actions on the morning of September 3rd? Griggs's attorney had clearly coached him. I believed I was maintaining courtroom security, Your Honor. There was confusion about who was authorized to be in the front section. Did you attempt to verify Judge Carter's identity? She reached for something in her bag. I felt it could be a security threat. A security threat? Judge O'Brien interjected, her Irish accent adding weight to her skepticism. A well-dressed woman with a legal portfolio posed a security threat? In today's climate, We can't be too careful, Griggs replied weakly. The panel's attorney, Michael Chun, began cross-examination. Officer Griggs, let's discuss your body camera. Can you explain why it was turned off at 9:13 a.m.? It must have been a malfunction. Chun produced a document. This is the device log from your camera. It shows manual deactivation at 9:13 and 42 seconds a.m. A malfunction would show an error code. There's no error code. How do you explain that? Griggs's face reddened. I don't recall turning it off. You don't recall? Chun pressed. This was 2 days ago, officer. Are you saying you have no memory of manually deactivating your camera moments before confronting Judge Carter? Maybe I bumped it accidentally. Chun pulled up a photo of the body camera model. Officer, this camera requires holding the power button for 3 seconds to deactivate. It's specifically designed to prevent accidental deactivation. Are you maintaining you accidentally held the button for 3 seconds? Griggs was trapped. I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights. Gasps filled the courtroom. A police officer taking the Fifth in a disciplinary hearing was almost unprecedented. Judge Park leaned forward. Officer Griggs, you understand that invoking the Fifth in this administrative proceeding allows us to draw adverse inferences? Griggs's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Griggs said, I understand, but I maintain my Fifth Amendment rights. Officer Brennan was called next. Younger and clearly terrified, he took a different approach, trying to shift blame. Griggs was the senior officer, Brennan said quickly. I was following his lead. He said she was being disruptive. Did you personally observe any disruptive behavior? Chun asked. Well, she wouldn't move to the back when told. Is refusing an unlawful order disruptive behavior? I thought it was a lawful order. Chun showed video from a courthouse security camera that had captured part of the incident through the courtroom doors. Officer Brennan, in this video, we can see Judge Carter standing calmly, speaking in a normal tone. Can you point out the disruptive behavior? Brennan watched the video, his face paling. From my angle, it seemed... Officer, you're under oath, Judge Sterling reminded him sternly. Did Judge Carter exhibit any behavior that justified handcuffing her? Brennan's shoulders slumped. No, Your Honor. She didn't. Then why did you support Officer Griggs's actions? Because... Brennan paused, then seemed to decide on honesty. Because that's how it works. We back each other up. Right or wrong, we maintain unity. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. The blue wall of silence, explicitly stated under oath. Chun then revealed the most damaging evidence. Officer Brennan, I'm showing you doc logs indicating your body camera was synced to the station database at 10:22 a.m. You testified earlier that you didn't touch your camera after the incident. How do you explain this sync? Someone must have synced it for me. The log shows your personal access code was used. Did you share your code with anyone? Brennan was cornered. No. So you did sync the camera yourself? Yes, Brennan admitted quietly. And when you synced it, did you notice the gap in footage from 9:10 to 9:47 a.m.? Yes. Did you report this gap to anyone? No. Why not? Brennan looked at Griggs, then back at the panel. I was told it would be handled. By whom? Sergeant Mitchell, the security supervisor. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. She made a note to subpoena Mitchell immediately. Next, ADA Whitaker took the stand in the afternoon session. He'd hired an expensive attorney and came prepared with a defensive strategy. My comments were inappropriate, Whitaker admitted up front, but they were made in a moment of confusion and don't reflect my professional conduct over 15 years. Chun wasn't buying it. Mr. Whitaker, let's discuss your text messages to Officer Griggs from September 2nd. Whitaker's attorney objected, but the panel overruled. The texts were directly relevant. Chun read aloud. Keep the room calm tomorrow. No scenes. If someone mouths off, remove them. Mr. Whitaker, what did you mean by mouths off? Anyone being disruptive. And who determines what's disruptive? The officers maintaining security. So you gave officers carte blanche to remove anyone they deemed problematic? That's not what I meant. Chun pulled up more texts. This one from August 15th. That woman from the community group better not show up again. And from July 2nd, keep the activists out. Can't have them influencing the jury. Mr. Whitaker, do you see a pattern here? Whitaker's composed facade cracked. I was trying to maintain order during important proceedings. By excluding certain observers? By controlling who could witness public trials? Judge O'Brien interjected. Mr. Whitaker, do you understand that public trials are a cornerstone of our justice system? That the public's right to observe is constitutionally protected? Of course, Your Honor, but— No buts, Judge Park said firmly. Either trials are public or they're not. You don't get to curate the audience. Then came the revelation that would seal Whitaker's fate. Maya had been quietly researching during the testimony and passed a note to Chun through an assistant. Chen's eyes widened as he read it. Mr. Whitaker, are you familiar with the case of State versus Johnson from last year? Whitaker looked confused. Vaguely. A drug possession case. The defendant claimed he was profiled and illegally searched. Body camera footage that would have shown the initial stop mysteriously disappeared. You prosecuted that case, correct? Yes. And State versus Rodriguez from 18 months ago? Another case with missing footage? These things happen. And State versus Williams? State versus Patterson? State versus Davis? All your cases, all with missing or corrupted footage that would have shown the initial police interactions. The pattern was undeniable. Whitaker had been involved in numerous cases where potentially exculpatory evidence had vanished. Judge Sterling called a brief recess. When they returned, he announced, based on the testimony we've heard, this panel is making immediate recommendations. Mr. Chun, please call your final witness. The final witness was a surprise. Sergeant Dale Mitchell, the security supervisor who'd been picked up by federal marshals during the break. He looked haggard and defeated. Sergeant Mitchell, Chun began, you've been offered immunity in exchange for truthful testimony. Do you understand the terms? Yes, Mitchell said quietly. Did you attempt to delete courthouse security footage on September 3rd? Yes. On whose orders? Mitchell took a deep breath. It wasn't orders exactly. Griggs called me, said there'd been an incident, and asked if I could help out. It's happened before. How many times? Maybe a dozen over the past 2 years. The admission was devastating. Systematic destruction of evidence, occurring regularly. Who else knew about this practice? Mitchell looked at Whitaker. The ADA knew. He'd sometimes call himself, asking if certain footage could go missing. Whitaker shot to his feet. That's a lot. Sit down, Mr. Whitaker. Judge Sterling commanded. You'll have a chance to respond under oath if you choose. But Whitaker's attorney grabbed his arm, whispering urgently. They knew further testimony would only dig a deeper hole. The three-judge panel reconvened the next morning, September 6th, to deliver their findings. The courtroom was standing room only, with media outlets from across the nation present. Judge Carter sat in the gallery's front row, maintaining the dignified composure that had become her trademark. Judge Sterling spoke for the panel. After reviewing extensive testimony and evidence, this panel has reached unanimous conclusions regarding the events of September 3rd and the systemic issues they've revealed. He adjusted his glasses and continued. First, regarding Officer Dale Griggs, this panel finds egregious misconduct, including false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under color of law, evidence tampering, and perjury. We are recommending immediate termination, loss of pension, and referral to the U.S. Attorney for federal prosecution. Griggs, sitting with his attorney, seemed to age 10 years in seconds. Regarding Officer Thomas Brennan, we find misconduct including excessive force, civil rights violations, and evidence tampering. While his cooperation and admission of the blue wall culture is noted, it doesn't excuse his actions. We recommend immediate suspension without pay, loss of seniority, and referral for federal investigation with a recommendation for lesser charges based on cooperation. Brennan nodded, seeming almost relieved. Regarding ADA Ethan Whitaker, this panel find a pattern of prosecutorial misconduct, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, subornation of evidence tampering, and ethical violations. We're referring this matter to the State Bar for immediate disbarment proceedings and to the U.S. Attorney for criminal prosecution. Whitaker's expensive attorney was already on his phone, likely discussing plea deals. Regarding Sergeant Dale Mitchell, based on his cooperation and immunity agreement, we recommend termination with loss of benefits and mandatory cooperation with federal investigators. Judge O'Brien then addressed the systemic issues. This panel is instituting immediate reforms, mandatory body camera activation for all courthouse law enforcement interactions, with automatic disciplinary action for any unexplained gaps, independent oversight of all footage with monthly audits. Any missing footage in criminal cases will create a presumption in favor of the defendant's version of events. Judge Park added, "We're also establishing a civilian review board for courthouse security, with members appointed by community organizations, not law enforcement. This board will have full access to all recordings and complaint files." The reforms were sweeping, designed to prevent future incidents like what happened to Judge Carter. Chief Judge Eleanor Pierce then took the podium. "I want to address the broader implications of what we've uncovered. This investigation has revealed approximately 47 cases over the past 3 years where video evidence was mysteriously unavailable. We're establishing a Criminal Justice Review Commission to examine all of these cases. Any defendant whose conviction relied on officer testimony contradicted by available evidence will be entitled to a new trial." The announcement sent ripples through the legal community. Dozens of convictions could be overturned. Back in Courtroom 4B later that morning, Judge Carter presided over the conclusion of the Thompson case. With the suppressed evidence excluded, ADA Stone had no choice but to move for dismissal. "The state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Thompson in the interest of justice," Stone said formally. Motion granted, Judge Carter ruled, "Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. This court apologizes for what you've endured. The system failed you, but today we begin the process of making it right." Thompson stood, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you for what you went through. If it hadn't been for what happened to you, I'd probably be in prison for something I didn't do. No one should have to endure injustice for others to receive justice," Judge Carter replied. "But your case is now part of the record that will help prevent future injustices." After Thompson left, Judge Carter called Maya Brooks to the bench. "Ms. Brooks, your work over the past few days has been exceptional. I'm officially offering you a permanent clerkship position in my chambers, effective immediately upon your graduation. In the meantime, you'll continue as a special clerk with full benefits." Maya's face lit up. "Your Honor, I'm honored." "Yes, absolutely yes." "Good. Your first assignment is to help coordinate the case reviews for the Criminal Justice Review Commission. Your attention to detail will be invaluable." That afternoon, Whitaker held a press conference announcing his resignation to avoid becoming a distraction. His carefully worded statement fooled no one. Within hours, the U.S. Attorney announced a grand jury investigation into his activities. By evening, the story had gone fully national. Cable news panels debated the implications. Civil rights organizations called for similar investigations in other jurisdictions. The hashtag Justice for Judge Carter had evolved into hashtag Justice for All, highlighting similar incidents nationwide. 3 weeks later, the reforms were already showing impact. In a routine drug possession case, an officer's claim of probable cause was contradicted by his body camera footage, which he'd forgotten was now automatically activated. The case was dismissed, and the officer faced disciplinary action. Dorothy Campbell, the elderly woman who'd shown kindness to Judge Carter, became a regular courthouse observer. She sat in the front row of various courtrooms, her presence a quiet reminder that the community was watching. Judge Carter had arranged for her to receive a special pass that guaranteed her seat. Maya Brooks thrived in her new role. She created a database tracking all cases with missing evidence, cross-referencing them with officer assignments and prosecutor patterns. Her work would eventually lead to 17 convictions being overturned. Officer Brennan, while suspended, began cooperating fully with federal investigators. His testimony revealed a widespread culture of testalying, police perjury to secure convictions. His cooperation led to further investigations in 3 neighboring jurisdictions. Griggs was less fortunate. Charged with federal civil rights violations, he faced up to 10 years in prison. His pension was revoked, and his name became synonymous with police misconduct. At his trial 6 months later, he was convicted on all counts. Whitaker's fall was equally complete. Disbarred and facing federal charges, he eventually pled guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice in exchange for a reduced sentence. He served 18 months in federal prison and now works as a paralegal for a small firm specializing in criminal defense. An ironic turn of fate. 1 year later, Judge Carter delivered a speech at the National Association of Black Lawyers Conference. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of young attorneys and law students. "A year ago, I was handcuffed in my own courtroom," she began. "It was humiliating, degrading, and unconstitutional, but it was also illuminating. It exposed a system that many of us knew was broken but couldn't prove. The difference was that my humiliation was caught on camera. My story couldn't be dismissed or ignored." She paused, scanning the audience. "But I want you to understand something crucial. Justice didn't come because I was a judge. Justice came because people like Maya Brooks had the courage to document wrongdoing. Because Dorothy Campbell had the compassion to show kindness when it mattered. Because dozens of ordinary people refused to stay silent. Every day, in courtrooms across this country, people face injustice. Most of them don't have law degrees or judicial robes. They don't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. That's where you come in. You are the next generation of guardians, not just of the law, but of justice itself." She concluded with words that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, but only when we have the courage to grab it and pull. Don't wait for someone else to be the hero. Don't assume someone else will document the wrongdoing. Don't hope someone else will speak up. Be the witness. Be the voice. Be the change." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Back in Courtroom 4B, business continued as usual, but with subtle differences. Body cameras were always on. The gallery was always full, community members taking turns observing. The old signs about seating restrictions had been removed, replaced with a simple plaque. "This is a public courtroom. All are welcome to observe justice in action." Judge Carter's judicial robe hung in her chambers, and on the inside collar, barely visible, was a small pin, the same one she'd worn that first day. But now it carried additional meaning. It wasn't just a symbol of her appointment. It was a reminder that justice requires constant vigilance, even from those who administer it. On quiet afternoons, when the courtroom was nearly empty, Judge Carter would sometimes touch her wrists, where the faintest marks from the handcuffs could still be felt if not seen. Not as a reminder of trauma, but as a reminder of transformation. The system that had tried to humiliate her had instead been exposed and reformed. Maya Brooks, now a full clerk, would sometimes catch these moments. She understood. They all carried marks, visible or invisible, from their encounters with injustice. The difference now was that they were using those marks as maps, showing others where the system's weak points were and how to strengthen them. The last entry in the court record for that period was a simple administrative note. Courthouse security protocols updated. Civilian Oversight Board established. Body camera compliance, 100%. Cases under review, 47. Justice delayed, but not denied. It was signed by 3 judges, a court clerk, and witnessed by a community observer named Dorothy Campbell, whose signature was careful and proud. Below all the signatures, someone had added in the margin, "The court belongs to the people." And for the first time in a long time, it actually did. What would you have done if you'd been in that courtroom? Would you have spoken up like Maya Brooks, or stayed silent like so many others? If this story made you think differently about justice and courage, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that challenge us to be better.